where are the low value men? Like, what are all the low value men up to during these trying times? Because the high value men, I know they're around. They won't shut the fuck up. Low value men, I have not heard a word out of. I'm starting to think I'm on their side. I think I want one of those. I want a low value man. They don't make podcasts. I haven't seen one low value man make a podcast. Do they not know how to use microphones? Maybe that's a good thing. That's hot. All right, I've never seen a man use a microphone for good.
Until now, everybody buckle up. It's low value mail time with your host, Danny Polishchuk. Welcome back, everybody, to episode number 99. It's 99, episode 99 of Low Value Mail on this Tuesday, March 12th, 2024, in the year of our Lord. Still don't know who that is, but we got a banger tonight. We've been waiting on it. We had some scheduling snafus. Jeez, my hair looks like, what did I get, the sling blade? I need a haircut. We got a banger today. Joining us on the show, we have Lou Ferrante. Lou Ferrante is an American writer who is a former heist expert and Gambino crime family member. He's now an author with a new book out titled Borgata, Rise of Empire, A History of the American Mafia. And he's going to be joining us very shortly. He's a very interesting guy. He's written, I believe, this book is the first of a trilogy, if you will, for the smarter people. But us dum-dums, we say trio. That's coming out. It's out right now, and then I believe the other two, but we're going to talk to him, get all into it, because it's a very fascinating story. I mean, it's really the Mafia is something that kind of permeates all of American pop culture to a degree. So we're going to get into it. He's going to be joining us very shortly. Before doing so, please like and subscribe. Hit the like button. There's a like button. 11 of you have liked it because most of you are just pieces of shit. I don't know what happened to Alex. I see that with Alex Stein. I don't know what happened to him, but I'm going to be hanging out with him next month. So I'll be doing a show in Texas. So anyways, please like and subscribe. If you're a listener of the podcast, leave a rating, a review. It all helps. If you'd like to support the show, patreon.com/lowvaluemail, or just join the channel. There should be a join button somewhere like there maybe. I don't know. I'm not watching right now. So I don't know. But somewhere in this vicinity, you'll see a join button. Eventually, YouTube will demonetize this channel and take that away from me. But until then, we still have it. Big important news. I've teased this, but officially starting April 1st, Low Value Mail will be moving to Mondays. We'll be moving it to Mondays, and we'll be moving the bathhouse to Tuesdays, starting April 1st. So look out for that. If you're on Tuesday and you're like, what is I don't remember Low Value Mail being a bunch of men sitting in a basement. You are watching the bathhouse, and you'll either want to watch yesterday's episode or tune in next week. That kind of reminds me of the pre-taped call-in show sketch from Mr. Show. Okay, so, and we are doing an episode of the Bathhouse tomorrow. Sorry there's been no Bathhouse for the last 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, it was Shane Gillis's fault. Last weekend, it was Marcelo Hernandez. He needed the thing, so it wasn't up to me, unfortunately. So that's what it is. That's what we're doing. That's what it is. I think it'll be for the best. So if you have a problem with it, tough beans, as they say. And then if you'd like to see me live performing my comedy skits, I will be this weekend in Saratoga Springs, New York. Saratoga Springs, the Comedy Works. Saratoga Springs, Friday and Saturday. If you live in the area, you never caught a show there, come on out. It's a fun time. I'll also be in Fairfield, Connecticut, Hamilton, Ontario, Dallas, Minneapolis, Edmonton, and Vancouver coming up. And all those ticket links are up now. So if you want to come to a show, you can do so. Go to DannyComedy.com or DannyJokes.com because I got that back. All right. I am officially rambling. All right. Let's bring on our guest. One moment, please. while we do this. Oh, Lou, you there? Lou, can you hear me?
I can indeed. How you doing, Danny?
I am very good. Welcome to the show. I'm glad you could make it. We had a little scheduling snafu, but we got you here, and I'm very excited to have you. So thank you again for coming on the show, because we got an exciting one. And for everybody watching at home or listening, we'll be opening the phone lines probably in about a half hour. So, Lou, before we get started, is it Lou or Lewis? I see it both everywhere. What do you?
My mother called me Lewis. My friends called me Lou or Louie. Most Louis. Today, Lou is fine.
Okay. So I guess what's the best place to start here? Maybe how did you get to this point? So you have a TV show on Discovery Channel where you basically went into prisons all over the world, which is and you basically like went and how long did you spend in the prison with each one? Like you went to different ones in different countries?
Yeah. We were cutting edge, meaning me and the production company when we went out and did this. I don't think now you see it a lot, but I don't think you saw it either very much so or at all when we had done it. We pitched a show to Discovery Channel, and it was basically locking into maximum security prisons all over the world with the worst inmates. And I had done time in my previous life. I had done time in medium, maximum security prisons, medium and maximum security prisons, state, county, and federal prisons. I've been in them all. So I sort of like was the expert on prisons, having lived so many years in these different prisons. And I could talk to, I educated myself in prison. So I'm sort of like on this side of the world now, on this side of like the fence. I'm not a gangster, but I could hang out with gangbangers. I could talk to them. I understand them. I've lived the life they lived. And I sort of like, I'm on the same level as them in a certain extent, or was on the same level as them at one point. So I could connect with them. And I could also connect with a viewer because I'm on this side of the fence now. I'm a legitimate person. I have friends in law enforcement. I have friends who are detectives. I have friends who are FBI agents, etc. So I'm sort of like was pitched to Discovery Channel as the perfect guy who could sort of like merge these worlds and show the viewer a subculture they're not used to seeing. So I went around the world and we locked into different prisons in Italy. In my favorite episode, one of my favorite episodes, there were actually two that were really, really good. We did New Mexico in the United States, but also we did the Philippines, which was incredible. We actually, the documentary was filmed so well, and not to sound immodest, but the production company that worked with me did a phenomenal job, and we got such great access into this maximum security prison inside the Philippines that the documentary was used by Rodrigo Duterte to flip the government in the Philippines. And Time Magazine's World Desk covered the story because it was hard to believe. I mean, I started getting emails. Yeah, I was getting emails from the Philippines saying you flipped the government here. And I found it hard to believe. And then the Manila Times contacted me and said the same. And then at some point or another, Rodrigo Duterte's secretary contacted me and asked me to come to the Philippines and view the documentary in front of Congress. They were sort of like, I guess, told to watch it by Duterte, who was sort of like a semi-elected, semi-dictator, semi-elected official, semi-tyrannical official. And I obviously refused because I wasn't in favor of everything Duterte did. There were some good things Duterte did for the Philippine people, and I know they really liked him, but I felt like he destroyed the rule of law. He was killing gangsters on the street. They had police forces the police force going out at night in some of the worst neighborhoods in the Philippines and just gunning down, guys without trial. And it was sad. Innocent people were getting killed as well. So I could not go there and watch it. But at some point or another, Time Magazine's World Desk covered the story, and it was a fascinating story. So that was one of the big ones. Another one of my favorite episodes was in El Salvador. When we went there, the two gangs, 18th Street and MS-13, were controlling the streets of El Salvador. Specifically, San Salvador was a really hotbed where there were a number of murders every day. 15, 20 murders, sometimes 25, 30 murders a day. Yeah, I mean, you pull into a gas station and there's security guards with shotguns and bulletproof vests just to get you, so you could fill up your tank with petrol and get the hell out of there. So it was really bad. I went through the jungles into Azalco prison, through the jungles of El Salvador, and I locked in with the worst inmates there. And because of my past, I was able to get along with them on a different level. I was able to lock in with them. We had laughs together. We had fun together. I faced the rest of my life in prison at one point, and they were serving life in prison. So we hit it off. They kind of we connected on a different level. And I was able also to tell them, look, I'm a journalist now. I'm an investigative journalist. So don't feel offended if I ask you a question that I would definitely have never asked you when I was a gangster. But I'm now on the other side of the fence. I have to show the view of this world. If you can't answer it, just let me know you can't answer it, but don't get offended. I'm not a rat, never was. And I'm not a gangbanger anymore either. So understand my position. And they got it. They understood it. They were smart guys. Even though they're criminals, that doesn't mean they're dumb. They were very sharp, especially the leaders of the gang who controlled the prison. And we had a phenomenal episode. These episodes, we made them quite a few years ago, and they still air around the world every single week in a different country. And even here, they replay them a lot in the United States on different channels within the Discovery Network's family. So it made a tremendous mark. And now people have obviously come along. I think Netflix has a series where some guy goes into prison, and Amazon might have one.
Yeah, there's a few of them. But who had the worst? Who had the worst prisons?
Well, I would think Izalco, you had 600 inmates. Every single one of them had a body, because to be a member of the gang, you have to kill someone. So every single man in there was a murderer. So that's sort of a bad prison. The one I spoken about, the Philippines, when I had walked into the Philippine prison called Bilibid, I was shocked to see, and I've been in some of the worst prisons in the United States. My very first day in Lewisburg Penitentiary, when I was a convict, when I was an inmate, there was a double homicide. 2 guys were hacked to death with machetes. So I've been in bad prisons myself. But when I went into the Philippines and into Bilibid prison, I was shocked to learn that the guys who led me in had batons, and they had these like badges on their chest. And I just assumed they were hacks, guards, screws, whatever you want to call them, the correctional officers. And at some point or another, I was clued in that they were inmates. These guys secure and guard themselves. Wow. It was a world of its own, which blew my mind. And there was like 12 gangs that ran the prison and 12 gang leaders. And at one point or another, we went to a place where, now and then somebody was thought to escape, and then they would find the bones years later. The guy was killed in the prison. They just bury him somewhere. It was a huge prison, over 20,000 inmates. And then at some point or another, the guy who I was most direct with, I had asked him, you guys have guns in here? I suppose you do, given that it's its own world and it's as reckless as it is. And he said, I can't show you on camera, but you would be surprised. And, basically told me they had everything from small arms to machine guns. And, not enough, I guess, to launch a crusade to get out of the prison, but enough to execute prison justice if they needed it. And sure enough, like about a week after we completed our filming, and I got news that one of the other gang leaders in the very spot we were last filming had a beef with another one of his minions. And the minion went back to his cell, got a handgun, and blew his brains out right there in that spot in the prison. So, that's proof. The proof was right there that they really did have guns without him having to show me. Now, that guy was subsequently, he died during COVID, the guy that I dealt with most frequently on that episode. His name was JB Sebastian, and we became very close. I liked him. But as I understand it, there was a lot of people who contacted me from the Philippines, and they did believe that he was murdered, because of his alliances with government officials and stuff. That sort of like, whatever the case was, it got deeper, and they asked me to come do a subsequent episode there. And at some point I might return there. I'm not sure yet. You need Discovery Channel, I'm not sure would do it. I'd probably have to find another streaming service that might underwrite it.
Yeah. Okay. So you have a book that just came out. It's the first of 3. I guess it's like a trilogy, I guess would technically be, about the Borgata Rise of Empire. Essentially how what we know as the Mafia came to be, right? So obviously you have some experience in your former life in the mafia and whatnot, being involved in that. But how did you actually, because you've written about all sorts of stuff, right? This isn't, obviously I guess this would be your wheelhouse somewhat, but from the sound of it, you spent a lot of time actually doing a lot of research on this. So how did you arrive exactly at this topic?
Yeah, it came about in a strange way. I know people tell you in the industry, literary agents, publishers, they want you to write what you know about always. So whenever I pitch books outside of my wheelhouse, as you said, right, I try to pitch other books that are outside the wheelhouse and stuff that interests me. I wrote a book about the brain. Unfortunately, I had to self-publish it. But when I write about what's in my wheelhouse, I'm able to get attach a big publisher to it. And my last book was published by Penguin Portfolio. It was an international bestseller in 20 languages, translated into 20 languages. And it continues to sell. I put it out about 10 years ago. It was Mob Rules, What the Mafia Can Teach the Legitimate Businessman. And it was basically, if you strip away all of the violence, what you have left is mobsters who are excellent business people. And I wrote stories to confirm that. And believe it or not, I get emails from people around the world who were CEOs of major corporations, who were involved in global terrorism units, etc. And they say they sleep with my book on their bedside table, which is the best compliment they could ever pay me. So this particular book, though, the trilogy about the history of the American Mafia, I had no real intention of writing it until I tossed it around my agent years ago, and she kind of knocked it down. She says, it's been written before so many times. Maybe we could think of something different. And then I was invited to Sicily by the German media conglomerate, Axel Springer. And when I got there, everyone spoke German as a first language, English as a second language, all of the Germans. And they put me next to someone who spoke fluent English and could probably communicate with me best. And he was an older man in his 90s. And we hit it off. We talked about history. We had a very, very like a mutual love of history. We talked about the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Middle Ages, up and through present day contemporary history. And at some point or another, he said, I'd love to publish your next book. And it was Lord George Weidenfeld, one of the biggest publishers of the 20th century, who the Germans sat me next to at the table. And he published some of the greatest books of the 20th century. He published the memoirs of Pope John Paul II, the memoirs of Charles de Gaulle, of President Lyndon Johnson, of Moshe Dayan. He published the Double Helix by Crick and Watson, which was the groundbreaking book about genetics. So he's done it. He had a phenomenal career. And as I understand it, I was the last person that he had a history of personally meeting authors and asking them to write a specific book for his publisher, for his publishing group. And as I understand it, I was the last one that he asked to write a history of the American Mafia as we sat in Sicily. That's what he asked me to write. So the next day we had lunch overlooking the ruins of Agrigento. And that's when he asked me, he goes, this is what I'd like you to write. And as I understand it, I was the last author that he had personally commissioned before unfortunately passing away. So I did dedicate the book to him, as well as his lovely wife, Lady Annabelle, and two dear friends of mine. So the book was commissioned by Lord Weidenfeld, who asked me to write it. And I thought my other books took me a year to write. I'd usually lock myself in a room. I was a jumpy guy when I was young. I might have had attention deficit disorder when I was young. I was all over the place. I couldn't keep focused. But when I was in prison, I learned by sitting in a cell for so many years to sort of like decompress and let the world spin around me while I sort of like found my center. And I read 18 hours a day. And because of that training that I had in a prison cell, I'm usually able to lock myself in a room for a year and write a book, as I did with my other books. And I thought this would be about the same experience, maybe a year and a half. And as it turned out, the research was so in-depth, and it morphed into from one book to two to three. I eventually wrote a trilogy, and it took me the better part of 7 years, during which time I gave up my social life. I gave up, I basically just locked myself in a closet practically with a pen and paper and stacks of books until, I felt like it was done, and then emerged throughout COVID when people telling me, how horrible it was to be locked down. I was like, locked down? I've been locked down for years already. I don't even feel it. I don't even know what you're talking about. Yeah. So it was like strange. Yeah. So I think I learned that discipline in prison. I couldn't sit still for a minute. The reason why I never had an education, I never went to college or university. I couldn't imagine sitting in a classroom and, for 4 years or 6 years or 8 years. I promised my mother, who died in my arms, that I would graduate high school and get a high school diploma, because she said some people in our family don't have them and it's embarrassing. We'd like you to have one. Please, please, please get a high school diploma. Not that anybody should be embarrassed if they don't have one, but I found my way through high school somehow by cheating and stuff. I ran a chop shop, chopping cars through high school. I was hijacking trucks after high school. So I was already going the wrong way, but I did complete high school. But I wasn't able to sit through college or university. And while I was in prison, though, that's when I became an avid reader and fell in love with books and studying and learning. And that's why I was able to discipline myself so easily and be able to write something for 7 years.
So what? Because I think it's kind of unclear in terms of, the quote unquote mafia. Like what exactly is the state of it right now? Maybe we'll work our way back to, because there's some interesting origin parts of it that I didn't quite realize. But what is exactly the state of it now? Because it seems not what it used to be, except for, like, I'm from Canada, and in Montreal, it actually seems like they're quite active. But I live in New York, and here it doesn't, seem like anything really. Like, they're on reality TV shows and stuff.
Yeah, it's a joke.
It's a joke. Like, I mean, if you're a real criminal, you can't imagine that you'd want that kind of attention unless you're really just not up to anything too bad. So what is the current state of it?
As I understand it, once again, I've left the life. I'm not involved. So I'm not active. And I haven't been for many, many years. I came home. I made the decision while I was in prison that I would walk away from it. And I told all of my friends that I'm done. Some friends had no more use for me, so I lost those particular friends. They weren't friends after all. But some friends who were in the mob and still are, they wished me luck. And they said, if you ever need me for anything, I'm here for you. So those were the true friends. In every walk of life, we make true friends and we make fake friends. Every one of us is familiar with that. No matter what we do or where we are in life. So I experienced the same thing. So I'm not active, but as I understand it, it's fallen apart. There's not much left. A lot of the unions, the big money in the mob, I was a hijacker, and most, guys like me, they make their way up through hijacking, but they don't have, or different type of criminal activity, that sort of low level criminal activity, as opposed to high level criminal activity, which would be controlling waste management, controlling garment industry unions, controlling the carpenters union, controlling business development projects like the Jacob Javits Center, etc. Those are real high level crimes. And the mafia was very, very rich, very wealthy, and very powerful when they had a grip on those particular rackets. And they've lost like 90% of them, if not more, throughout the years over the last couple of decades, and attributable to a lot of different things. But one of them being the abundance of snitches. A lot of people went sour, were able to sort of be forgiven for multiple murders, get a free pass, and give up everybody else. And with the more and more people that were taken down, RICO was something, racketeering indictments, that started in like the 80s for the most part, although it was developed earlier by Robert Blakey, who was the creator of the RICO. It didn't really get it sort of like get the wind in its sails until the 80s and 90s. And that sort of like, instead of serving maybe 4 or 5 years and being able to come back and pick up where you left off, now people are serving 40 and 50 years because of the numbers, that they hand out for RICO indictments. I had a Hobbs Act indictment, which is like a RICO. It's interstate commerce. It was all heists and hijackings. And I faced the rest of my life in prison because of that, because each statute carried a 10-year, each crime carried a 10-year statute. So if there's, let's say, for example, 10 crimes, that's 100 years if you get convicted. And each time a gun was used in the commission of a crime, that's an additional 5 years. At the time, assuming the laws haven't changed now, it was an additional 5 years each time a gun was used in the commission of crime. So that would be another 50 years. So I was facing 150 years. Could you serve 150 years? If you went to trial and you blew, yes, they will give you that time. I have friends who've been in prison for 30 years now on the same cases I had, because they chose to take it to trial. And the government has the attitude, well, if you have the audacity, if we build up all this evidence against you and we bring in all these snitches that are going to take the stand and point the finger at you. And you have the audacity to think you're innocent, and you're going to tie up a courtroom for 2 or 3 months, pick a jury. We're going to give you the penalty for that. And I can't tell you how many times when I was in a detention center, how many people came back to the detention center when they left court, because you'd be taken to court by the marshals and then returned to the detention center to go to sleep at night, came back and cried on my shoulder. Grown men, tough guys, because they got 78 years, 92 years, 135 years. And they said, I'm never going to see the world again. I'm never going to see my children again. I'll never know my grandchildren. And sure enough, 30 years later, most of them are still in prison, with the exception of a few who've gotten out.
And they could have taken some sort of
Yeah, they usually, the government, what they do, the government has a strategy where they lock up so many people, the federal government. We lock up more people than the rest of the world. So they lock up so many people that if everybody chose to go to trial, the system would grind to a halt literally overnight. The courts could never handle the abundance of trials if everybody said, I want to go to trial. So what the government does is they really make good cases. Sometimes they fudge, but for the most part, a lot of cases are solid with regard, I should say, to the federal rules and statutes, which I don't entirely agree with, which is another conversation. It's harder to convict somebody in a state. You need more evidence as opposed to the federal government. So that's something I don't agree with, but that's not the prosecutor's fault or the FBI's fault. They're working with what they have in front of them, and they usually do a good job to put people away. Now, what happens is, though, they'll offer you, when they get you, and they got your balls to the wall, in plain English, and you're facing 150 years, like I said, they may offer you 20 or 15 as a plea. And they'll dismiss, maybe you'll plead guilty to 1 count on the indictment. They'll dismiss the rest, and you keep the system moving. First, they obviously get you to cooperate so they can bring more people in. But if you refuse to cooperate, which gives you a pass, you get out in a minute, or you just serve your time until you're done testifying and you go home. But if you don't cooperate, the government usually offers you some type of plea agreement, a plea offer. So we were being offered 20 years, take it or leave it, me and my co-defendants. And we thought that was high. We fought our case. We thought that we would pay big lawyers, big money attorneys to see if they could get the plea down. And we would pretty much make them believe that we were prepared to go to trial, when in fact we had made the decision early on that we knew we really couldn't, because everybody around us was getting slammed if they blew trial. So we knew we could blow trial, but let's make the government think we'll go, and hopefully the government will give us a better plea. And at some point or another, the 20 years they were offering me and my co-defendants, they dropped mine to 13 years. We were fighting for 3 years. I had 3 different cases. They dropped mine to 3 years, and they dropped all of my co-defendants under me to 10, 9, 8, 7 down the line, in matter of what they felt was importance as to the conspiracies. So my co-defendant said, look, they said it's a global plea. Either you all take it or no one takes it. That's how it has to be. So I said to my co-defendants, what do you want to do? And they said, Lou, we really want you to take it if you can, because we'll all get better deals and we could get on our way. We've been facing 20 for the longest time. So I said, fine, we'll take it. So I took 13, and they all got less than me, and we went on our merry way. I found out later when I reversed my federal case. Once again, I had 3 cases, but when I reversed the major case, the federal FBI case, on a technicality, I wasn't innocent, that they had the right guy, but I found a technicality in the law, and I was able to reverse the plea allocution, things the judge should have asked me inside the courtroom. That's public record, by the way. Nothing is sealed. Once again, I never snitched. But once I saw that there were inconsistencies with the plea allocution, I reversed the case. They vacated the sentence, sent me back to court. And my goal was to get maybe another better plea and try to get out, because the case was old now. They had lost the witnesses and stuff. I figured. What I learned was the main witness against us, who had entered the witness protection program, he had subsequently violated the program, and he was thrown out of the program. So as I understood it, when we took those pleas, they didn't even have a main snitch against us. So basically, we gave the government a gift. We didn't know that. And I had but I mean, look, Danny, it was the best thing that happened to me, though, because had I gotten out, my mind wasn't changed yet. I would have went right back to crime. I would have eventually got that life sentence I deserved, or maybe, God forbid, killed somebody or gotten killed, or, and got a life sentence for murder, or been in somewhere buried right now, in a dump. So it was for the best. But, I didn't know that at the time. But, once I changed, I realized it.
Yeah. So there's a weird thing right now where, because obviously from all, like the American Mafia kind of is very pervasive in popular culture. Everybody knows about it. There's some of the best movies of all time. And obviously snitching is such a bad thing. But then there seems to now be people who were openly snitches who are like going and doing podcasts and stuff, like essentially the opposite of yourself. Is there no, because my thought would be like, hey, isn't there going to be someone who's going to come kind of make good on this, on the fact that like that's, I guess, how it used to be.
Yeah.
Is that over? Like these people are like, no, there will be no retribution. I can just be going on podcasts talking about me being a rat and nobody cares.
Yeah, it's a great question, because a lot of people wonder, I think there's just so many of them now that, unless it's a personal beef somebody has with somebody else, I don't think you're going to see it anymore. If a particular mafia family, one of the 5 families, let's say for argument's sake, said, we're going to kill all our snitches that are making podcasts and doing, on Twitter and walking around making YouTube videos, I mean, it would be a full-time job for a hit team. They would be out morning, noon, and night just tracking people down. There are so many snitches. So, I mean, that's part of why the mob is in a degenerative state of, degenerative state right now. It's sort of falling apart. And I don't think they're going to be able to pick up the pieces. And when I grew up, if you were a rat, it was the worst thing you could be. I mean, you were really, you were just a piece of garbage if you were a rat. And that's the mentality I had growing up. I believed in that. And, now there's been a sort of like a major culture shift where it's not this, I see people praising rats going, what a man of honor, what a great guy he is. And, I'm like, oh my, are these people out of their minds? How could a person who's willing to kill his friends maybe, and then throw his other friends under the bus to get the best deal he could get, is acting like a jackal, in the wild. And self-preservation is all that's on this man's mind. And he's being hailed as a hero or somebody who's honorable. It's just crazy to me. When I was a kid, I'll just give you an idea of how not only mafia culture has changed, but also just culture, period. When I was a kid, all of the legitimate people in my neighborhood, if the cops, I'll give you a perfect example. When the feds were watching me, the feds would sit on my house now and then. Detectives came to my house now and then. If it was a crime I was being investigated for, they'd leave a card in the door or they'd sit across the street. I would have either a neighbor walk over and knock on my door and say, legitimate guy, and say, hey, Lou, I don't know if you know that car on the corner is watching. I think it's the bulls, the cops. And I'd say, thanks, I appreciate it. One time a tow truck driver years ago used to have chaser trucks, where the tow trucks in New York used to get a call for an accident and they'd all chase to the scene to try to get the accident so that their particular auto body collision shop could get the work.
Yeah.
And then eventually there were so many accidents on the road because these guys were doing 100 miles an hour, blowing lights to get the work, that they took away chaser trucks. But when I was a kid, there was a guy who drove a chaser truck. He came over to me and he goes, I'm just giving you a tip. I never talked to the guy before in my life. He says, but I knew he was always there. I always saw the truck in his driveway. He goes, I just wanted to give you a tip. The feds are watching you. I said, thank you so much. Do you think my neighbors would do that for me today? I mean, look, I'm a legitimate guy. There's no reason to do it. But do you think any neighbors would do that for anybody today? Now the cops knock on a neighbor's door and they go, he's right there. I'll tell you what time he comes and goes. Yeah. It's a different world.
Was there some element, because I've heard before that, because you grew up in Queens, was it?
Queens. Yeah. Queens.
So I've heard something to the effect of when you had like the mob in your neighborhood, they actually kept order. Like it wasn't disorderly. It was actually, you kind of wanted them there. There was obviously negatives of them, but everything was kind of fairly orderly because they were there. Is that the reason why? Like in the past versus now?
It's part, I helped a lot of people. So if somebody had a problem, a personal problem, let's say you came to me, you're a legitimate guy, and you came to me and you said, look, I'm beefing with my neighbor over something. My neighbor put up a fence and it's 3 feet over my property. And when I told him, can you move the fence? He told me to go F myself and punch me in the face. And maybe you're not a tough guy. Maybe, you don't know how to react to that. You called the police. He denied it. The cops said, what are we going to do? There's no witnesses. So you came to me. And then I went and told the neighbor, maybe I'll give you a pass for cracking Danny in the face, but you got until Tuesday to move the fence or you're going to be impaled on it. So, that's sort of like how you helped people that you knew. And I did it time and time again for people. So if people had a beef, people knew me, they came to me. They knew that I had a little power. They knew that I was willing to be violent at the time. So that's sort of like I wasn't afraid of prison. And I proved that when I went for many, many years. But I was never afraid of prison. So it's hard to back then. I'm a legitimate guy now. I just want to run your list once again.
Of course, yeah.
But back then I was the kind of guy where if I'm not afraid of prison, it's hard to tame a guy like that. There's not much you could do to stop me if I want you, or if I'm after you, or because I'm not afraid of the consequences. So if I said something, that's the end of it. And now using that, look, it filled my ego. I did a lot of bad things. I'm not telling you I was Judge Judy, ruling over little disputes all day and making, the world a happier place at the end of the day. But it made me feel better to help regular people. And I did that all the time. And most of the mob guys I knew were the same way. If there was somebody they could help, they did it. So that was sort of like, that went a long way in the neighborhood, where I don't know if that close knit is around. I had a co-defendant who went on the lam in the old lady's house across the street for like a month. And she'd watch and tell him when the cops or detectives were pulling up in front of his house. It's an old lady. What's that?
She could have gotten in a lot of trouble for that herself, right?
Absolutely. And nobody would take the risk today. I don't think anyone would take the risk of hiding a fugitive today, but it was different times. I remember these days clearly, and it was only 35 years, 30 years ago, maybe. I went away in 94. So we're talking 30 years ago, I went away. So just above 35 years ago, this is how much things have changed since then. Now I remember reading an article or seeing it online or something that in New York, I think whoever the mayor was, it might have been de Blasio, whoever was during COVID, he said, if you see somebody, I'm sorry?
Yeah, it was de Blasio. De Blasio.
Yeah, he said, if you see somebody without a mask, here's the hotline, call, rat them out, call them in. And people were calling the hotline. And I'm going, you got to be kidding me. This is like the Stasi in East Germany. I've read history by now. I'm schooled in history. This is like this is like Stalin's Russia, or the Stasi in East Germany, where you're told to rat on your neighbors, and you do, and you go grab the hotline and call on them. This is psycho to me. This is something that, I can't imagine that in a real, the world that I grew up in. I can't imagine it in that world. No matter how you feel, and I'm not making any I'm not making any sort of statement on wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, COVID works.
It's just the snitching on your neighbors stuff.
Just snitching on your neighbors in general. Right. Exactly. Which is to me, something I had never seen in my life and couldn't imagine seeing. And I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for the book, I just want to get to that, and we're going to open the phone lines in a little bit. So I've only heard the term Borgata in the context of the casino in Atlantic City, but I guess can you just give a kind of quick rundown of that?
Sure. Yeah, so Borgata, I was trying to come up, I'm writing the book and I'm using the term Borgata a lot in the book. So at some point it dawned on me, I should call this the Borgata trilogy. And each volume is Borgata. The first one is Borgata Rise of Empire. Then Borgata Clash of Titans will be out at the end of this year as well. Pre-order it, everyone. And get
on Amazon or your website or whatever, right?
Yep.
And we'll put the link below for all that stuff.
Cool. Yeah. So basically Borgata is what we called, like, let's say you, Danny, had a family, a crime family, and we would either say Danny's crew or Danny's Borgata or Danny's Brigade, which was like a way to say Borgata, like the Italian slang, Danny's Brigade or Borgata. And the Borgata was your mafia family, but the word originated from like a close-knit Italian neighborhood, maybe like less income, lower income Italian neighborhood. Like think of like the Spanish barrio. We know the word barrio, the barrios, which are the Spanish neighborhoods where if you go through a barrio, you're not expecting to see a $30 million mansion with gates and a guard. You're expecting to see, pretty much lower income people to poor. That was sort of like barrio is originally the word was sort of like Borgata was that, the Italian version of the Spanish barrio. And it became eventually the name of a crime family, which is also supposed to be a close-knit group of people, not necessarily, Ivy Leaguers or rich people trying to get rich. Whoever does achieve that, great, but that's where Borgata came from.
And so, because you said you were in Sicily when you met the German guy, right? Were you in Sicily for something related to that? Because that is essentially where this all started.
No, it just happened. Axel Springer was the German media conglomerate. They invited me there to speak at their annual retreat. I do speaking engagements. So they invited me there to speak at their annual retreat. And so I was just happened to be there and happened to be seated next to him. And then he makes me an offer I can't refuse in Sicily. What are the odds, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. But so, because I never realized that the actual start of the mafia in America was in New Orleans, right? Like they didn't
Correct.
really go, why New Orleans? Because I've never, when you think of American Mafia, you think of New York and New Jersey, basically, maybe East Coast for sure, like Northeast. But so I guess it was, why New Orleans?
Yeah, so the whole thing fascinated me. When I started doing my research, I'm from New York. I always thought that we were the sort of the hub of the mafia in the United States. Sort of like if you imagine the Roman Empire, everything stems from Rome. And then there are sort of like, there's outposts, there's satellite places where the Roman army may be or Roman governors, but Rome is where the center is. And that's how I always imagined New York. When I started to do my history, my studying of the history of the mafia, I realized that the early Southern Italian immigrant waves to the United States, which were infested with mafiosos, specifically Sicily, a lot from Naples, some from Calabria. When they arrived here in the United States, they sought the climate that they were used to. My own grandparents weren't used to 9 feet of snow. They came from the Mediterranean, but they braved it in New York. But a lot of Italians said, well, the climate in New Orleans, in Louisiana, is very much like the climate in the Mediterranean. We'll go there. And also, too, there was a lot of work. They followed wherever the work was. Italians just wanted to work, Italian Americans. So wherever there was opportunities, they usually follow those opportunities. And following the abolition of slavery in the United States in the 1860s, following the Civil War, once slavery was done away with by the 13th Amendment, we needed in the United States not only labor for our industrial sort of like grid that was sort of upcoming. We're an industrial nation now. We need more and more labor as we become more and more industrialized, but also the slave states needed labor for the plantations and old sugar plantations, tobacco plantations, cotton plantations, etc. They needed people now to work. So a lot of times the Southern Italian immigrant said, I'll work, I need work. So they migrated down south. And at some point or another, I consider Louisiana to be the mafia's Plymouth Rock. That's where the first Borgadas began to arise, right in Louisiana, which was always a lawless place. And I make that clear in the book. If for the readers who are interested in just U.S. history, there's a lot of that intertwines with mafia history. And one of that happens in Louisiana, where the Italian mafiosos land in a place where it's completely lawless. Bodies were laying on the street for days. The cops didn't even care. Nobody would even clean up the body. Big deal. The cops were involved in the bordellos. The cops were involved in the gambling casinos. They all took envelopes, and the envelopes trickled upstairs through the precincts, the station house, to the chief of police, who was then in bed with the mayor, who was then in bed with the governor. So it was a very corrupt place in the 1800s, and that's when the mob lands there, and they felt like the ship just went around in circles and dropped them off back in Sicily. That's how perfect it was for them. And that's sort of like where at first they plant their first major flag in Louisiana. And then the mobs, then we shift the book. I bring the story back to New York as the mob starts to appear in New York.
And was that like kind of during Prohibition time?
That's when it gets strong. And I cover those years. That's sort of like the golden age of the mafia. And the reason being is the mob was they didn't have like the sexy romantic name that they would get during Prohibition. Before Prohibition, guy turns up dead, torso's cut in half, and other guy's bloated, floating, down by this, the wharf. And really, this isn't a sexy mob. They're just like the newspapers would even refer to Italians as these sleazy criminals, these greasy criminals, these slime balls, and all of these newspaper clippings I found. Some of them I relate in the book, where, they were just like, they were considered atrocious people, and all they did was murder each other. And then all of a sudden, when Prohibition comes around, the United States, the populace, it was a small sort of lobby that was able to push Prohibition through Congress and through the Senate. And they squeaked through, I think they squeaked through the Senate. They had a little bit more in Congress, or vice versa. But they passed it with a small lobby that they had been trying for years to get it through. And they eventually got it through. But the majority of Americans were beside themselves going, are you kidding me? You know, the Germans and Irish loved beer. The Italians loved wine. Everybody wanted to drink. And they're being deprived of alcohol by their government. So they couldn't understand it. And here comes the mafia, and who partnered actually with Jewish gangsters. A lot of the Jews, I make that sort of alliance very, very clear in the book of how all that came about, how these Jewish gangsters who left their countries, like, for example, a lot of them fled pogroms in Eastern Europe. And, you know, here they are. They're saying, you know, do we need to be hung on a tree? Let's get the hell out of here and go to America. So they arrive the same time the Italian Americans arrive, and they're packed into the same ghettos as the Italian Americans. And sure enough, there are quite a few Jews who say, you know what, I'm going to throw off my kippah, and, you know, I'm not going to temple, and I'm going to pick up a stiletto and hit the streets and see what's going on out here. And a lot of those renegade Jews partnered with these renegade Italians, whereas the majority of the Jews and Italians were just hardworking people looking for a new life. But this small percentage, they partnered with each other. And during Prohibition, they supplied the entire country with liquor, with alcohol. And they became now the people who are giving us what we desperately are being deprived of by the United States government. So now sort of the people are more into the mob than they are into the government. They like the mob better. You know, so the Lucky Luciano.
The mob never did anything to them, right? Like they had no ill will towards, if anything, they kill
each other. Yeah, they were killing each other over bootlegging wars, but they were never killing regular people. They were opening up speakeasies, letting the people hang out in them. It was actually the first liberation of women. You know, women were chained, you know, you're talking around this, you know, the age of suffrage, right? You know, the women's suffrage movement. You know, women are chained to the domestic roles for centuries. And now they're in a speakeasy smoking a cigar, cursing like men, dancing up a storm. So that was sort of like, you know, even the women love the mob now because the mob's opening the speakeasies, and, you know, men and women are getting what they want, you know, which is freedom to do what they please. So a lot of people saw mobsters differently. And then they come out of the Prohibition. This is what interesting. It's sort of like a trifecta. The mob comes out of Prohibition with tons of money. They're flush with cash. And then the stock market crash hits. And now the banks clamp down across the United States. Most banks fail, but the few remaining banks clamp down, and they're very tight with credit. Nobody wants to give anybody credit. So, you know, cash is king. And the mob is flush with cash. So you're going, if you're in New York and you want to stay alive where you would normally go to a bank for a loan, a bridge loan or something to keep up your business, or you want to open a new business, the banks are going, no. But the mob guy in the corner is going, I got plenty of money. What do you want to give me in return? Maybe a piece of your business. And the mob was able to infiltrate so many different businesses and industries through their ability to loan cash to so many people that desperately needed it. And they started to infiltrate unions around the same time. And they really, really, really became powerful. So it was like a perfect storm for the mob, having come out of Prohibition with all that cash. And then the stock market crash hits and nobody's got cash around the same time. So this was like, you know, like, whoa, perfect, what a miracle. Yeah, it was perfect.
And is that what got them kind of starting to get involved in trade unions and like construction and all that? Yeah. Yep.
So they loaned a lot of money to construction companies, to garment industries, dress companies, dress factories. I could remember, just give you an idea of how this isn't the distant past. My grandmother, who was from Sicily, worked in a sweatshop when I was a kid. I can remember going to pick her up from work with my mother and father, where there'd be hundreds of sewing machines. And, you know, the fans are up on the ceiling, and it was called a sweatshop for a reason. All of these older ladies were sweating their asses off, you know, making dresses or pieces of material for something else. And my grandmother, I'd have to go in the sea of sewing machines and find her. Well, if you take that now and catapult it back to the 1930s, those same sweatshops existed, and the mob controlled a lot of them. They opened the sweatshops. And Lepke Buchalter, who plays a big role in the book, he partnered with Albert Anastasia and Lucky Luciano. And Lepke Buchalter being, I think he was a Russian Jew, and he partnered with Luciano, who was a Sicilian, and Albert Anastasia, who I believe was from Calabria, if I'm not mistaken, or in that area, sort of the Campania region of Italy. And he partners with them, and they infiltrate a lot of the unions. And how they did it was brilliant. They knew that it was difficult to infiltrate the bigger unions. So Lepke Buchalter comes up with the idea, We don't have to infiltrate all of these huge amalgamated clothing workers of America and all of these huge unions that have tremendous clout. They go directly to the White House, these people. They're in charge of labor relations for the White House. We don't have to go that high. We start with, if we could cripple the truckers union, how do you get from one place to another?
Right.
If we could cripple the cutters union, the people who cut the fabrics and send them to the dress companies, we could cripple the rest of them. So what he did was then he infiltrated these couple of small unions like the cutters union and the truckers union. And through that, he had everybody at their feet. He had everybody kneeling at their feet, going, please, 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 don't do this to us. What do you want? And that's how he controlled little by little the rest of the unions. So it was absolutely an absolute brilliant strategy where he got his foot in the door and then was able to swing it open.
Smart. Yeah, I was wondering, because are they, what to extent, I guess there's not a lot of them still left, but to what extent are they still involved with construction and all that stuff? Because I heard you speaking about, there was someone who I believe you served time with who was he was a big union guy. I can't.
Yeah. So I was away with a couple of very big guys. So let me give you an idea of when I went away in 94. So from 94 to 97, I'm in a holdover detention center, and I'm with a lot of different guys that are getting picked up. Guys I knew, a lot of them I knew from the street. A lot of them I met in there, but we had mutual friends, so we hit it off right away. And after that, I got sentenced and I was sent to the penitentiary, the maximum security penitentiary in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, which was a whole nother story. But when I was away, I got close with a couple of big union guys and a couple of big construction developers. One of the guys, I won't mention his name now, he was a capo in the Colombo family. He supplied all of the rebar for some of the biggest building projects in New York, including the World Trade Center. I mean, you want to talk about, he's a mob guy. And that's what my book Mob Rules was about, by the way. It's about how these mob guys are able to they're incredible businessmen if you take away the violence. And he wasn't, by the way, a mobster first. He was a businessman first. And then he got involved in the mob because each time he had a beef with another union, he's got to go call up a wise guy who has to sit for him, meaning at a sit down, to straighten out the beef. So at some point they say to a guy like that, look, we'll give you your button. You could then handle the beefs yourself. And you just have to answer to somebody with us. And that's it. So that's how he becomes a wise guy. But he's not like a street guy like me who hijacked trucks. He's a businessman first.
He just wants to work. And this is just part of the essential bureaucracy of just
got to get along, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, you want to go to Washington, you got to join the Republicans or the Democrats. You can't say, well, I'm going to be my own party. How far you think you're going to get in Washington, D.C.? You got to join a party. So in New York, you got to join a mafia family, right? That's how it works if you're developing big jobs and stuff. So he did the West Side Highway, all these big jobs he did. So anyway, the union guy I think you're talking about was my friend Anthony Calagna.
Yeah. Exactly.
I could talk about him because he's dead. Yeah, he's passed on. But Anthony was so good at what he did. And he used to tell me, Lou, I negotiated this deal. I got them an extra 7 cents or 8 cents and I'd say 8 cents. What the frig is anybody going to do with that? And he'd go, no. That's every hour, millions of people across the board, this and that goes into the pension. The pension funds this. And he would break it down for me. And it was fascinating to me how this worked. So I says, Ant, what are you doing in here? I don't understand this. What the frig? How'd you get caught up in this shit? And he said, look, Lou, when I became the head of the union, I sat down at my desk and all of these envelopes are built into the job. So within a day or two, guys are coming to me, handing me envelopes or expecting envelopes for all of this. In other words, you're now being brought into the machine that already exists. This machine has been existing this way, where these envelopes have been changing hands for decades, maybe to some extent or another. Where, you got to pay for this, you got to pay for that. You want the bid, you got to pay this. You want the job, you got to pay that. You want to keep the trucks moving to the site, you got to pay that. If the trucks slow down, the project gets stalled. The project gets stalled, it costs the developer millions. All of these things, it's a machine. And when Anthony takes over the union, he says, I sit at the desk and there's envelopes coming to me and there's envelopes that got to go out. What do you do? What do you do?
You're saying, I guess you can't just say we don't work that way.
Right. And that goes back to Jimmy Hoffa plays a big role in my volume 2 of the Borgata trilogy, which is, as I said, it's available for pre-order now, but it won't be out till the end of the year. Jimmy Hoffa, I believe after reading hundreds of books on the Teamsters, on Hoffa, on and articles, probably over 100 books, probably hundreds of articles. And after I walked away with the feeling that, was he crooked? Yes. Did he love the Teamsters, and was he 100% behind every single worker? Yes. But he had to compromise. He has to figure out how to make it work. And you need the mob. You're not going to carry the Teamsters presidency. You're not going to be elected. You need all the locals across the country to vote. When all the locals vote, you have to carry Chicago and you have to carry New York, just those two places alone. How are you going to carry Chicago and New York if you don't make deals with the mob? So you got to make a deal with the mob. So Hoffa's stuck in a position where he has to deal with the mob. He does not have a choice. And he's got to make sort of like, a devil's deal. It's like a Mephistopheles deal, right? He's a Faustian deal where he's got to somehow reach a hand across the table and deal with them. Otherwise, it's not going to work. They'll kill you. They want you out. So sometimes now Hoffa was one of the famous for saying no to a mobster. And that's why the mob didn't. That's a whole different story. Yeah. You can read about it in volume 2, why he got clipped. They liked the guy who succeeded him because the guy who succeeded him never said no to the mob. Hoffa used to say no. If you came to Hoffa with a deal and said, look, I need $30 million. I'm building a hospital. Hoffa would look at it, even if you were a mobster, you were a capo in whatever family. He'd look at the deal. If it made sense, you got the $30 million. If it don't, he'd tell you no. Hoffa was the only one who would do that. And the mob was frustrated with him plenty of times because you couldn't scam him. And that's why time and time again, he made money for the pension fund. He didn't lose money. And he liked real estate deals, and the mob brought him to him. I'm not giving Hoffa a pass for the criminal conduct. You might get a prosecutor, or an FBI agent who watches this and says, what, are you kidding me? He was committing a crime. Yes, he was. I agree. You have to weed out criminal conduct. You have to, if you hit them with racketeering charges. I agree with all that. I'm a citizen now. I understand it. But if you look at the bigger picture, he had no choice but to do that. And he did it as best he could.
Yeah. And so, because I know we're saying that the mafia kind of, I guess, is very limited compared to what it was. But, if you're developing something in New York City right now, like, is that still a factor? Like, to a lower extent? Has that been kind of rooted out?
To a lower extent. I mean, there are a lot of companies, I'm sure, that are connected still. There are a lot of unions that may be somewhat infiltrated, but they've done a phenomenal job of weeding them out. For example, when I got home from prison, a friend of mine who was a mob guy and had a great job with a union, it wasn't a no-show job. He showed up, but he didn't really have to do much. And he was a real wise guy, made a lot of money as a wise guy too. But it was somewhere to hang his hat during the day and take home a big paycheck for doing nothing with all the benefits. Well, they sent him a letter. And they said to him, basically, the letter came from, I guess it came from the city, but they hired an ex-FBI agent to draft the letters and send it to them, a retired FBI agent. And it basically, the letter was, if you leave of your own accord, we won't investigate you. If you challenge this letter and you want to stay in your job and with this union, we will be investigating you. That's all we're telling you. So he came to me and he says, what do I do? I said, you got to leave. I said, you know what an investigation is. Do you want that? So you have no choice. So they did a really good job of basically weeding out a lot. That letter went to hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of people.
Yeah.
They targeted, they had a retired FBI agent who knew who people were. And they knew if you were connected. They knew if you had a no-show job or a cushy job. They knew if you were connected to somebody and got it that way. And they weeded you out. And they basically, so they've done a phenomenal job. In my problem is this, though. As good a job as they've done is getting out a lot of people. Who replaces those people? So it's worth a 1-minute discussion.
Yeah.
For example, Anthony Calagna. When Anthony Calagna was put in jail, who we spoke about earlier, he had hundreds of letters written to the judge from people in the union going, please, 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 let him out. He ran the union right. We had our workers' rights. Now you got some schmo from the government that filled in for him, and he doesn't care about us. So, you get that too. Now take, for example, the waste industry, right? A friend of mine ran the waste industry on Long Island, and he had it locked down. He was charged eventually with running a cartel. When he ran that cartel, the charges were valid. He did everything the indictment said he did. So I'm not saying he was innocent. He went to jail and he understood he had to go to jail. He never complained. I was away with him and he never complained. I was away with him, never complained. But what replaced him? So when he was running the garbage on Long Island, there were a lot of smaller companies. Let's say, Danny, you had 4 trucks and I had 5 trucks. Both of us could operate in Long Island. All he told us was, you can't go undercutting each other and stealing each other's customers. And you have a territory, Danny, and Louis has a territory. Don't go into other people's territories. This is how we have it. But not one business was run out of business. They were just told, this is the rules. If a guy broke the rules, they did bad things to the guy. That's against the law. I understand that it's against the law. You can't go burn the guy's truck or break his fingers in the door of the truck. You're not allowed to do that. It's against the law. I get it. So I'm not saying they're innocent, but I am saying this. Take that. So they're running this cartel with small companies that are allowed to operate in the umbrella of this cartel. Now the government runs them all out of the business, runs him out of business, runs everybody like him out of business, out of the garbage industry. And they allow it to be replaced with a major corporation that comes in and has all the trucks and buys out all the small people and tells you, here, take your money and get the hell out of here. So now you, who had 4 or 5 trucks maybe, and you were feeding your family for decades, maybe it's 3rd generation. Now you're told you're crushed. It's like Walmart comes in and puts a little hardware store out of business, right? Yeah. So put out of business. Now you can't compete now. So if I want to open up a couple of trucks, this big corporation will squash me like a bug. So if that's the case, you have to say to yourself, gee, maybe I was better off with the mob, because the O'Reillys, the O'Flanagans, the Irish, the Germans, the Muellers, and the Italians, the Ninos and the Ginos, everybody had a trucking company. Everybody had a garbage company, but now they're all out of business. Yeah. None of them exist anymore. But now we got one big corporation, and where's the guy? He's in the Bahamas. He's got a little tax shelter in the Bahamas, and he runs everything from his $1 billion home in the Bahamas. Is that better? I don't know. You decide. I'm not making it one way or the other. I'm just telling you, maybe half a dozen one way, 6 the other, right?
Yeah. It's almost like the mob's just been replaced by the federal government to a degree.
Or by a bigger mob,
or by a corporate mob. Yeah, I guess. Yeah. But I guess the corporate mob's enforcement arm is the government and their policing and whatnot. It almost seems like they kind of. Yeah. It seems like that. So in terms of, obviously everything started in I guess Sicily is where it started. Does it continue there now? Like unhampered
as I understand it, I'm obviously friends with Sicilians, and as I understand it, they still exist there, but there was a big sea change in attitude in the last century. Toward the end of the last century, the Sicilian mafia went on a rampage, and they murdered judges, they murdered policemen, and the public finally was nauseated by the violence. They would blow up an entire block to get one person.
I mean, I was in Naples. I was in Naples, like I think maybe 10 or so years ago, and I was near like the tax office. And there was like a bomb left on the steps of the tax. Just, that was basically just sending a message to the government at that point. That wasn't even a specific person.
Yeah. Well, if you're talking Naples, so Naples is the Gomorrah.
Naples is different, yeah.
Yeah, it's opposed to the mafia. But I did do a documentary in Naples. I filmed a documentary I infiltrated the Gomorrah. I basically went in there, not infiltrated. I didn't do it sneakily. I asked them to talk to me. Some guys talked to me off the record. Some guys talked to me in disguise. Some guys didn't want to talk to me. But I did a big show on the Gomorrah. They're still in Naples. They still operate there. The port of Naples is a gold mine. It's probably up there with like the port of Shanghai.
Right. I guess anywhere where there's a port, that's just incredibly lucrative, because for drugs, goods, like kind of everything, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And what can, I think what differs through time is the degree of control they have over these things. Look, if the world economy crashed, I think that they would fill the vacuums all across the globe. There are places where, whether it be the Chinese, Japanese, Armenian, Albanian, Italian, Irish, mafias all over the country, all over the world, would see opportunities and run in. That's why, it's so important that hopefully the economy does sort of survive But if the dollar ever crashed and went under, and the economy went with it, who knows? They will run into places that they haven't been seen in a long time, and control a lot of different areas, and they would immediately control the black market, and people would need the black market just to survive.
Yeah. You know what? We got a call. Let me take a call real quickly. One moment, please, while I pick it up. Hello. You are on Low Value Mail.
What's up, Danny?
Mark, how's it going, buddy?
What's up?
One moment, please, while we patch you through. All right, you're on with Lou. Go ahead, Mark.
Hey, Lou. Pleasure to be here. Great questions. Or can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
I can. Yep.
Great questions, Danny, so far. I just want to ask Lou about the Ambrosiano affair, and if you think that the Vatican had any influence in the mafia, invading, we'll say, America at the time that it did, and maybe the larger, impetus of the mob was to maybe bring some of that old world control that the Vatican had over Europe into America.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question, Mark. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to cover it in the book, but I am hip to it all, and I'll give you the what I feel happened. I think that I do think that the Pope was killed. I do believe that, and I believe there was a cover up involved to hide what happened. I do believe that there was tremendous corruption, and bankers had sort of infiltrated the Vatican through corrupt people inside the Vatican. But I also do believe there were a lot of good people there, and that was sort of the conflict they had and the reason why it came out. A lot of people got wind of it and did want to stop it, and it came to light. But the guy who was hung under Friar's Bridge, obviously, I think he was murdered. I don't think he hung himself. The evidence suggests that he was murdered. Also, Marcinkus, I think was his name, the cardinal in Chicago. He had something to do deeply, and that would speak to the question you had as far as the Vatican affair / mafia sort of coming here and having something to do with things here. I think there was a direct connection between Marcinkus, I think his name was, once again, in Chicago, who was the big cardinal there, and the Vatican Bank. And a lot of evidence came to light. There's been some great books written about it. I think the best book I could recommend to people out there, and if I could write it better, I would, but I can't. So I'll just recommend his, and it's called In God's Name. And I think it's David Yallop, Yallop, In God's Name. It was a great book. It goes into that, and it's fascinating to see how far, how deep and wide the tentacles went within that conspiracy. And it was the probably, other than, obviously we know the church was corrupt during, the Borgias and the Medicis and stuff. But since then, I think this was the highest level of corruption we've seen during that affair. I do believe the Pope was killed. I unfortunately.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I appreciate the recommendation there. I wasn't familiar with that book. And I also wanted to ask on the point of New York City, because I wasn't familiar with the New Orleans origin, but what I was familiar with, and maybe you know about this as well, was the corrupt Tammany Hall in New York City, which I believe preceded the mob and maybe helped create the mob, right? Because, how are you going to fight this enemy unless you can, mirror their strategies and try to beat them, right? That's really what it seems like the mob is a response to the corrupt government here in the United States.
Yeah, I urge you to read Borgata, Volume 1, Rise of Empire, because I deal thoroughly with Tammany Hall. I get into it, and It is interesting. Yeah, and you're right. It did predate the mafia. Tammany Hall was basically, it started maybe late 1700s. It was, or early 1800s. It was the sort of like, I think it was something to do with the Sackums, they called themselves at the time, something to do with Indians. They took the names from Indian tribes and stuff. And basically the hall was the center of New York politics. It wasn't up in Albany where the capital is. It was always Tammany Hall. And Tammany Hall basically then eventually was taken over after the Irish potato famine. A lot of Irish floated to the United States. 1 million or so Irish people died, and 1 million or so others came into New York, and they took over the hall. They sort of like pushed out the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants and took over the hall. And then the Irish were very amiable toward the Jewish and Italian gangsters, and they worked with them. So the hall became very, very corrupted under the Irish and in consort with the Italians and the Jews. And then at some point, Frank Costello, who plays a major role in Borgata Volume 1, Frank Costello basically took over so many wards and precincts that he was able to take over the entire hall. And at some point, he was even appointing judges. He was appointing prosecutors. You couldn't become elected mayor unless Frank Costello gave a nod and allowed you to be elected mayor. And time and again, the evidence would surface that Costello was deeply, deeply embedded, entrenched in Tammany politics. And he didn't really deny it. He was proud of it. There was one time when a telephone conversation between a New York State Supreme Court justice called Frank Costello at his house, and it happened to be Bug, the call. And he said, "I want to thank you, Frank, for the appointment. Thank you so much." And he says, "You got it. I told you if it's done, it's done." And they hung up, and then the guy, Frank Hogan, was the prosecutor at the time, and he went to the various people who were in control of Tammany Hall. I think Mike Kennedy was the head of the hall at the time, or Paul or Mike Kennedy. And he went to him and he said, "Listen, Kennedy, what's going on with this? Do you know anything about Frank Costello and the judge being appointed?" And he says, "I have no idea what you're even talking about." And as it turned out, Kennedy was put there by Frank Costello. So, I mean, that's how entrenched Costello was. And through Costello, the Italian-American Mafia in New York. So once again, I urge you to read the book. It's very interesting. I get into it because it is a crucial. There was a mafioso who said, of all the places that the Italians went when they fled Italy and Sicily, they went all over the world. They landed in South and Central America. They landed in Tunisia of North Africa. They landed in England. They landed everywhere. Why did the American Mafia become so strong? Why is this the only place that the Mafia really took root? And that is because what you said, the corruption here in America was always at such a high scale in the political realm, the political fields, that, it was easy to work with them. And they did. And yeah, and I get into it in the book. I urge you to read it. And if you have any thoughts, drop me an email when you're done. Let me know. Right through my website, louferrante.com.
Yeah, the Tammany Hall thing is
wonderful. Yeah,
they were like not elected or anything. These were just like kind of.
Yeah, even if you were elected, whether you were elected or appointed, because the elected officials then appointed other officials. But even if you were elected, you could pretty much choose who gets elected, right?
Right.
I mean, you could go try to run for president tomorrow, Danny. You're not going to get anywhere. Somebody's got to allow you. RFK wanted to run for president as a Democrat. He was told, no, it's done. So, we even experience that now today in America, in this day and age where, they kind of have to allow you to run.
Yeah.
Go run.
At least for the major parties. You could run as an independent, but then you lose.
See how far you get. Good luck, right? Yeah. I mean, you could run with $6 in your bank account versus 600 million, somebody else has behind them, and, good luck. Yeah.
Right. All right, Mark, anything else?
Right on. Yeah, really great conversation. I'm going to be picking up the book tonight, and I just wanted to end with this anecdote that my friend shared with me. Well, not really an anecdote, but we live in a world where the only occupation that wants you to be rich is a thief. And I think that's kind of ironic, right? Everybody's trying to, take your money from you, whether it's your doctor who wants you to be sick or your lawyer who wants you to have legal troubles all the time. So anyways, great conversation. Keep it up. Have a good night.
Thank you, Mark. That's so true what you said. Thank you.
Speaking of, we were talking about RFK, JFK. I heard you speak about that. I curious your thoughts on basically the mob's involvement in the JFK and RFK subsequently.
Yeah. So I don't want to give too much of a spoiler away because it's volume 2 of the Borgata trilogy, but just to give you an idea, because it's a great question and it's fascinating.
Because I know it's one of the people that people look at as, potentially, when they don't believe Lee Harvey Oswald did it by himself.
Right. He didn't do it. Yeah. I mean, the evidence is overwhelming that he didn't do it or didn't do it alone. I believe he was involved in the conspiracy. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that he never even fired a shot. So, I mean, we all could see Kennedy's head going back in the Zapruder film. It looks like the shot came from the grassy knoll. My eyes don't lie to me because
Right.
someone tells me differently. That doesn't mean, I know what I see. I've shot guns before. You could shoot at a watermelon and see how it reacts. You don't need to be a genius or a physicist. But so what the mob did was the mob basically, when they were thrown out I get in volume 1, I get into the mob's infiltration of Havana, Cuba, and how they were beginning to open up all of these casinos in Havana, and they controlled it with Fulgencio Batista, who was the dictator / elected sort of president of Havana at the time, of Cuba at the time. And at some point or another, Batista gets overthrown by Fidel Castro in late 59. And he throws the mobsters out of Cuba. He says, these fascist mobsters have to go. They're gone. First he tosses and turns about it. He lets them go back to the casinos. Then he throws them out again. And in the end, he throws them out. So the mob gets thrown out of Cuba and they lose billions of dollars in revenue a year. And they want to get back in. So the CIA, who also wants to overthrow Castro, they figure that they have a partner with the mob. Go to the mob. They want to kill Castro too. They would love to. Why don't we get them to kill him? And so the CIA partners with the mob. Nothing I'm saying is conspiracy theory. There's overwhelming evidence.
Of course.
Yeah. So they partner with the mob and they're trying to kill Castro. So the next step is at some point or another, following the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, where the brigade, the Cuban exile brigade, tried to take the beaches of the Bay of Pigs and were hurled back into the ocean, then taken prisoner. Kennedy was blamed for that sort of by a lot of people, either right-wing hawks or the CIA, who said, this guy, he blew it. He wouldn't let us give the air cover when they needed it. He wouldn't let us allow the Marines maybe to even go in and help them. But basically they wanted air cover. The Marines later on in the missile crisis, during the missile crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis, when we discovered there were missiles right off the base, right off the coast of Florida, once again, the right-wingers in Kennedy's government, Kennedy was a Democrat, and sort of like more to lean left. And the right-wing hawks during the Cold War said, look, here's our opportunity. They're putting missiles there. Let's invade these SOBs. Here's our chance to get Cuba back, throw Castro out, and, clear the Western Hemisphere again of this trash. And Kennedy said, no, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. And not only that, but the Cuban exiles who left Cuba because of Castro, who desperately wanted to go back to Cuba, they were beside themselves with Kennedy, saying, this is the second missed opportunity to give us our homeland back. Now we're stuck in Miami for the rest of our lives, which today, 1963, right? It's 50 years later, 60 years later, they're still there. So here we are now, where the mafia, the CIA, and the Cuban exiles are all hating Kennedy at the same time. And the mafia hated Kennedy because Kennedy, by the way, they helped him get in. A number of mafiosos helped him get in.
And when you say helped him get in, these are what, just contributions?
Yeah. Yeah. So when Joseph Kennedy Sr., who was a little bit of a shady guy, he was a crook on Wall Street, then he was a bootlegger. Once again, there's evidence, that's overwhelming evidence of that. I state the evidence. I source the evidence in my books because people will say, no, he was a crook. And most people do understand that nowadays. So Joe Kennedy Sr. had mob connections through the Cal Neva Hotel, which was sort of like it was in the Nevada border, where half the hotel was a casino and then half was a resort, Nevada, California border. And then he had connections with the mafia through Frank Sinatra, who was the liaison between the mafia and the Kennedy family. And Sinatra was asked to Joe Kennedy was running the campaign and paying for it for John Kennedy. He basically funded the campaign and basically controlled it. And Bobby Kennedy was the campaign manager, John Kennedy's younger brother. So at some point or another, Joe Kennedy made a deal with the mob and said, listen, we need to take some of these swing places that you control. For example, we need to take Chicago. And Chicago just eked it out in favor of Kennedy because of the wards that were controlled by Sam Giancana, who was the acting boss of the Chicago mob at the time. Giancana helped Kennedy get those votes in those wards. He swung those votes for Kennedy. And the mob also there's evidence that they gave him a lot of campaign contributions when Kennedy desperately needed it during the West Virginia primary. Kennedy was going against Hubert Humphrey, and Humphrey was supposed to win the West Virginia primary, and Kennedy was short on cash, and the mob supposedly came in at the nick of time to help him. Now, the mob was promised in return for helping him get into the Oval Office that sort of the Kennedys would look the other way. They'd move on to more pressing national issues like civil rights, which desperately needed attention. They'd move on to the Cold War, which, getting back Cuba, facing off against the Russians in different places like East and West Berlin or Southeast Asia. And they'd move away from us, this sort of crusade that Bobby Kennedy used to have during the McClellan Committee hearings. He'd move away from that, and the Kennedys would sort of focus their attention elsewhere. That's what they were promised. Well, what happens is Joe Kennedy, once John Kennedy gets elected, John appoints Bobby Kennedy Attorney General. Now, once Bobby's appointed Attorney General, he's supposed to kind of look the other way and not go full force against the mob, but he goes against them. And then
specifically for just whatever they were doing, or was there...
He mobilized the entire Justice Department, the IRS, the INS, the FBI. Every branch of the Justice Department was told to collectively go after mobsters, and convictions and indictments for mobsters first went from like 30 or 40 a year to like 600 a year. He just started locking them up in droves. These guys are getting, the pressure they're getting, taxes, the IRS is coming after them, their wives. They're constantly being subpoenaed, constantly being indicted. He's pressuring prosecutors throughout the United States to indict this one, indict that one. He's going after Hoffa. He's going after Sam Giancana. He's going after the boss in Louisiana, Carlos Marcello. And he's going after the 5 families in New York, and he's relentless. 5 families, Robert Morgenthau was more in charge of that. So they got a little bit of a break because Morgenthau didn't want to be a puppet for Bobby Kennedy, but they still got a lot of pressure. So at some point or another, Joe Kennedy, who made this nefarious deal with the mob, he has a stroke and he's incapacitated. And that's when I feel you got to read volume 2 to get the rest of my thoughts and the rest of what happens. But I feel at that moment, they lost their champion inside the Kennedy family. And then the Kennedy boys just ran wild and kept pressuring the mob. And by then the CIA hated them. The Cuban exiles hated them. The mob hated them. And it created the perfect sort of alliance of for a cabal against the Kennedys. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it seemed like they were making a lot of enemies in kind of every corner in that regard. And you think that they even had some part in Robert Kennedy as well?
Well, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that someone who was present for the Kennedy assassination, John F. Kennedy assassination in Dallas, was also present for the Robert F. Kennedy assassination in California. There's also conflicting witness testimony from inside the kitchen where Bobby was shot with regard to how far away the weapon was and how many people shot at him. Yeah. So there is some sort of conspiracy that seems to have been covered up, though there's less evidence-based material on the Bobby Kennedy one than there was on the John. Obviously, there have been a lot of Kennedy conspiracy theorists working their asses off for decades, whereas there's less material on the Bobby one. But Bobby does seem like it was something was afoul there as well. Something smells.
Interesting. Yeah. All right, phone lines are open, everybody. If you want to call in, 1-888-949-2969. So I want to talk about one thing that I've heard you speak about. That's so you're pretty big, I guess, advocate for prisons in terms of like reforming them in a sense. Actually, you know what? We got a call right here. We'll put a pin in that for now. One moment, please. Hello. Who am I speaking with?
Oh, hello.
Hey, what's up? You're on Low Value Mail. 1 second, please. What's your name? Hello.
Hello. My name is Jake. I'm out of Detroit.
Jake out of Detroit. You are on with Lou. First time caller. Love to hear it. You're on. Go ahead.
I actually have found this conversation between Louis and yourself quite incredible, very fascinating. I wanted to ask a question to your guest, Louis.
Sure. How you doing, Jake?
I'm doing fantastic.
Good.
So, Louis, I wanted to ask about your time in the mob. When you were in the mob, what was the most lucrative job that you guys did?
Yeah, so we were indicted for, besides hijacking trucks, I was also indicted for an armored car robbery, a conspiracy to commit an armored car robbery. So we were we were also investigated for armored car robberies as well. So that would be obviously the biggest, armored cars. The one that I was indicted for, which I could speak about, we went to California. We got a tip on a Loomis armored car in California. So it was before the age of terrorism, when you could basically book a flight under a phony name and fly somewhere.
Where do you get these tips from? Someone who's essentially,
everybody.
But like people who want to essentially get paid for the tip?
Yeah, usually a guy would come to you, somebody who's usually legitimate but knows you and has a legitimate job. Maybe he gets in over his head with gambling. Maybe his wife is a spendthrift. Maybe he's got a kid that's sick. Whatever the case is, he needs money. And he would come to, usually that's sort of like the breaking point for somebody, who might be otherwise legitimate, who comes to us. But sometimes people just want to make money, and they see an opportunity, and they're just opportunistic. So guys would give us tips on trucks all the time, and you'd be surprised who they were. Like nowadays, that's in the back of my head. A lot of that will never come out. They have families, they have grandchildren, and, they live legitimate lives now. And, their grandchildren will never know, they gave me a great tip for, $500,000 one day, and they got their end of it, but they went on to live legitimate lives. But whatever the case is, we got a tip on a Loomis armored car in California. So we shipped down the guns, the walkie-talkies, the police scanner, the duct tape, etc., in a box.
Like in the mail?
UPS. Believe it or not, back then. Yeah, back then. This is before the age of terrorism. We put it in a box, you shipped it to a friend's address, and you had it when you got down there. Crazy. And, these things happened all day long pre 9/11. Like I said, we all booked flights to California under phony names.
They never asked for ID? I guess
I would call a girlfriend and say, book 3 tickets, Joey Russo, Frankie, this and Joey that, and you get on the plane. Nobody asked you for ID. Crazy. So, it was like a no-brainer. So, I did it all the time. And so now we go, and there's surveillance photos, just so you know. This isn't like taking place in my imagination. You could go online or go on my website, louisferrante.com, and there were FBI surveillance photos of me in California about to rob the armored car. So, these surveillance photos are online, as I said, and on my website. They were entered in as evidence when I was indicted. So we go down there, and at the last minute, we plan the heist. And at the very last minute, FBI came out of the woodwork in concert with the San Francisco Police Department. And I thought that we were public enemy number one. You move, you're dead. And they basically hauled us in. They said, look, we know you're here for no good. They had a tipster back in New York. Apparently, we figured it out later. Somebody tipped them that we were down there about to hit an armored car. And they said, we know you're here for no good. And they asked us we said, look, we're here on vacation. We lied to them. We said, we're here on vacation. And, what's it take to get a vacation without being bothered? We made wisecracks, all of us. And we were each interviewed, and we all stuck to the same story, that we just wanted to get away. When they asked what we did for a living, we didn't do anything. We were all street guys. So they were, the next question was, vacation from what? You don't work. Well, you still want to get away. We work off the books. We lied our way through the interviews, but they knew what we were down there for. And they told us, look, whatever the case is, get your asses out of town. And, at some point or another, we got out of town at some point or another. We were indicted for that. When I got my indictment years later, that was on it. So they did get us for that, but we were investigating.
Conspiracy because obviously
that was a conspiracy. Yeah, that was a conspiracy to commit an armored car, but we were also investigated for armored cars that were robbed. So that's sort of like the biggest things I was investigated for or indicted on.
And now because that is actually just a personal curiosity, I guess, but when 3 of you go and rob an armored car, how do you, what percentage of that money do you keep? How is it dispersed? Because, we've all seen Goodfellas when he gets the car and the,
so let me tell you, any heist I did, it could be a hijacking, it could be a safe, a vault, whatever we did. I was the head of the crew. They obviously charged me with I was no mastermind. I definitely wasn't. The word mastermind is definitely overblown for who I was at that point in my life. I was an ignorant kid, but I knew how to get a job done, a heist. And so they considered me the mastermind, but I was the leader. And I put together the heist. I got the tip. I put together the crew. I had a policy of we split it equally. I obviously have to kick a piece upstairs. I got a rabbi, right? I got a capo. I got to talk to a wise guy. I got to kick a piece upstairs. You put it on record, whatever you do. But as far as if me, you, and Jake are on the score and it's 60,000, well, let's say it's 80. I kick 20 upstairs. The other 60 is 20 apiece.
Gotcha.
Or if it's 70, I kick a dime upstairs. The other, the rest is 20 apiece. I was always fair with everybody. We always shared it equally, and everybody always came back for more. And that was sort of my policy. Jimmy Burke is the guy you're talking to who killed everybody. I was friends with growing up. I was friends with Jesse Burke, his son, who was a nice kid. And Jimmy Burke was the guy Robert De Niro played in Goodfellas. Jimmy Conway, they called him. It was really Jimmy Burke. And, Jimmy Burke was a killer, and he had a policy of not sharing. It was too many millions. He was afraid guys were going to get caught, guys were going to talk, guys were going to spend too much, and he started whacking them. I felt like, look, you know what? If my friends are going to F up this thing, I'm not going to kill a friend. So, we whacked it up. We went our separate ways, and I hoped I wouldn't get caught. Eventually, I did get caught, and, I had to go to jail, and that's life. But I was always fair. I always did an equal share, and that's how I'd always whack it up.
And is there is there a set amount that you have to basically give to whoever's above you? Like, is there
no, never.
Like
look, if you're like, the best way to explain it is,
because you have to tell them that you're going to go do this, right? Like they essentially.
No, actually, I wouldn't. I'd be honest with you. It depends. Sometimes I put things on record. If it was like, if I'm taking a truck out of JFK Airport, I put that on record because there's a lot of trucking companies that are mob connected. Right. So that I would put on record. I put that on record before time. If I'm going to do something like a heist, like a brazen cowboy on the streets heist, I didn't put that on record. I'm not telling nobody. I'm not taking a chance of anybody picking that up and getting in my way and, God forbid, a shootout on the street or something, or, I didn't want, so then I would go to them right after and say, this is what I just did, but that's something that once again, if it was something that was in the realm of the mob's world, like a truck coming out of JFK Airport, who owns the trucking company? Maybe it's connected to the Lucchese family. They might tell me, stay away from that place. Yeah. Don't go near that truck. Get another one. Or maybe you're doing something where you're going to a business and you're taking, the cash on a Friday or something, before a payroll. The guy pays his workers in cash. Maybe I have a kind of an idea that this type of business might be connected. So I'll put that on record, and they'll say, we don't know about that guy. Go get it. Or they might say, look, if something comes back and bites us in the ass, we'll deal with it then. Or they might say, that's Joey Schmoey's or whatever. Stay away from it. Sure. So, there's all kinds of, but if I'm going to do like I'm going to rob an Al McCall in California, I ain't telling nobody. It turned out that one of the guys that I was traveling with there had a roommate that knew he was going, and he turned out to be a snitch, and he tipped the feds, as far as I know. That's the story we put together to the best of our understanding.
Yeah, to figure it out, yeah. Man, my heart's beating faster just thinking about doing that. That must have been crazy adrenaline doing shit like that.
I got to tell you, I walk through a parking lot now, and I'll see, as I sit here with you today, I'll walk through a parking lot now and see an armored truck, and I'll get more nervous now thinking of what I did then than I was then. Crazy. I mean, that's, a difference of a person I was too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Wow. Jake, anything else?
Another question
go ahead.
you.
Go ahead, Jake.
So obviously in regards to when you were a young man and you started out, if you could tell me, what was your first job that got you in? Was it an easy job? Was it something that was kind of crafty? What did it entail?
There's no specific job that sort of like you do this one job, and that's probably more like for a movie, like you do this one job and then we're going to allow you, into our little world. Or I'm out there. First I was, I'm a crook since I'm a teenager. So first I'm stealing cars, then I'm chopping cars for auto body collision shops, then I'm hijacking trucks. First truck I hijacked had to do with an auto body collision shop. I hijacked a tool truck. The Snap-on and Matco tool trucks. I started hijacking them. Then I started hijacking other trucks. So gradually you're starting to meet people on the street because you're working with other guys who are on the street. You're selling your goods to fences who've been on the street for years. You're coming to people's attention. and they're seeing that you're an earner and you're making money. And slowly but surely, you start meeting guys. Some guys are full of shit. Some guys are real. Some guys are big. Some guys are small. Some guys are up there. Some guys are down here. And you meet all these different guys, and then you start to weed through you start to pick through the weeds and see who's the guy I want to deal with, who's the guy I like being around, who's the guy I could trust. So it's sort of like part you, part them. And then eventually, you got a reputation. People could say, I vouch for him. I bought 2 trucks off him, or I did this with him. I did that with him. I've been here. I've been there with this guy. And slowly but surely, people come to know you. And that's how you sort of gradually become part of that world. So it's a long process. It doesn't happen like nobody knocks on the door, or you don't.
You're not getting you're not getting recruited into it because it's just basically relationships. And
it takes years. If I went back tomorrow, knowing that I write books now, I've done a Discovery Channel series. I saw guys a few months ago, I was in Staten Island. I gave everybody hugs and kisses who I saw, active guys. But if I told them, look, I want to come back into the life, they'd probably roll me up in a rug. They'd go, look, he's selling books. He's making shows on Discovery Channel. I don't have that history I had back then. Yeah. I have a different history now. So, they were happy to see me. They love me. They know I'm not a rat. They know I never ratted. So, you get a big hug and a kiss, but, I know how to keep it moving. I'm not involved in that world now, and I don't want to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. Jake, anything else?
Well, I think that's pretty much all I wanted to get off my chest, but thank you so much for having me, guys. Thank you, Danny. Thanks you so much, Louise. You guys are awesome. Amazing conversation, by the way. So have a great night, guys.
Appreciate
it. Thank you, Jake. If you like the book, drop me an email.
All right. Thanks, Jake. We're going to take another call here. One moment, please. Rafe. How's it going, man?
Yo, what's up, guys?
Hey, what's up? Hold on while we transfer you over. And by we, I mean Zoom. All right, Rafe, you're on with Lewis. Go ahead.
How's it going, Lewis?
Hey, Rafe.
So I have a couple questions. That's George Washington in the bus behind you, right?
Yeah, it is. Well, which way do I have to go to show you?
Yeah, you can see it right there, over your right shoulder.
Is that the right way?
Yeah,
you're right.
It's from the 1876 centennial.
Oh, that's sick.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's wild. I'm a big fan.
How'd you get that?
Yeah, just I think he helped create a great country that's done a lot of bad things, but figured out how to make it better all the time. And I think he's founding father.
As someone who's not from this country, still the best country in the world.
I think it's a great country. I think we've done a lot of great things in the world. We've done bad things too, like I said, but it's a mix. Yeah.
Yeah. No country has a clean record across the board. What's up, Rafe?
So I just had 2 questions. What have you ever had like a good Samaritan try to stop anything you're doing?
No, thank God. We always thought about that. Not to the point where it was violent, I should say. There was never anything where, we got away with everything we did on the spot. And I always thought that once the crime was done, I always thought that it was finished and it could never come back to bite us in the ass. And I only learned later that a guy years later could just basically testify and say, Louis did this, Louis did that. And you could be facing a lot of time in jail for the rest of your life. I did not know that at the time. So we never got caught on the spot. And luckily no one ever interfered because obviously I would not have wanted to lose my own life, but I thank God that we never accidentally took someone else's life. That would have haunted me, probably would have drove me to suicide because it's, I lived with a lot of regret at one point during my years in prison. And at least I didn't have to live with that regret. That would have hurt me.
Was there any element when you were say, taking trucks or whatever, where either whoever was, driving the truck, did you guys identify yourself to some degree so people just knew to let it go versus call the police?
Yeah, yeah, of course. You get on a truck. The first guy, this is an interesting thing. The first truck I ever hijacked, I hijack it with my friends. We're all young. We get the guy, and then we're driving, and we got the guy tied up. Unfortunately, sadly, I'm going back again over 30 years. Yeah, this is over 30 years. And I served my time for it. Anybody out there, I went away a long time and I was in the worst prisons.
And you're one of the only guys who's doing, on YouTube right now who wasn't a rat.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it seems like that's like a lot of the guys are like who are kind of exposing themselves to to YouTube and whatnot. They're like they always end up.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah,
anyways,
thank
go
you.
ahead.
Yeah. So where you complimented me and I lost my thought.
Oh, so I was just saying, like, did you ever like indicate to people so that there was no
So the
calling of
first
the
guy,
police or whatnot?
Yeah, the first truck I hijacked, a tool truck. We get the guy, and the guy hopefully he's still alive one day. He's out there and he hears this one day because we hijacked the truck, and the guy, we tell him, look, can we put a pillow under your ass, along the ride? Yeah, please throw the pillow under anything you need from the glove compartment, anything you need from the visor. Yeah, there's pictures of my family on the visor. Can you put them in my pocket, please? What else you need? There's a manifest sheet or whatever, the clipboard. Put the clipboard under my arm, please. So then we tell them, look, we promise we won't hurt you. You're going to be home with your family at 5:00. We would never hurt you. We just want the truck. So he says,
were you like doing the like thumb under your neck gesture when you were saying that?
I'm sorry.
Were you doing like the thumb under your neck gesture when you said that?
Can you? I didn't hear.
He was saying like, did you do like a thumb? No, you're just telling them like.
No. We're telling them. No, we're telling them honestly. It wasn't like. It wasn't any type of. Okay. Yeah, dead honest. Completely honest. Look, we don't want to hurt you. We just want the truck.
And I mean, it's like that person doesn't own the contents of the truck.
No, that's what we said. Exactly. So at some point he said to us, he goes, look, you guys are nice guys. He goes, you're really nice, nice guys. He goes, you ever think this stuff will catch up with you? He was trying to give us, help. And, went right over my head. I didn't, but that's how much he liked us. He says, you guys are really nice guys. Maybe you should rethink this, might catch up with you one day. He knew we were young. So, it went right over my head. Years later, I'm sitting in the penitentiary. I got 13 years. Guys are killing each other around me, literally murdering each other. Double homicide, I said, first day in Lewisburg Penitentiary. You could look it up. And, here I am going, wow, that guy told me this day would come. It caught up with me. And, you can't imagine that when you're young. But, basically, though, to answer your question, we always wanted the guy to know we would never want to hurt. Once the guy was under control, once we had the truck, we would say, we don't want to hurt you. We'll never hurt you. We just want the truck. I promise you, you'll be home eating dinner with your family today. Insurance will cover this shit. Don't worry about it. Is there anything you need in this truck? We'll give it to you. And then once we would leave the guy, we'd leave him somewhere where he'd either be found, right away or quickly. We wouldn't want to hurt somebody. It was like the last thing you want to do is hurt an innocent guy. Now, God forgive me. I understand that some people could have been traumatized by the event. I lived with the regret thinking about that, but we never wanted to physically hurt anybody.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel that.
Mm-hmm.
I have one more question. Do you have a favorite heist that's like happened in the past, 20, 30 years or anything?
I do. I'm not going to talk about it tonight. That it might come out at one point, but I got a couple of favorites, but there was one in particular. I
think it's so insane now how I was just in Vegas in September and there was a massive, basically cyber attack on MGM, the hotel and casino there, where essentially like some 20-year-old kids from Eastern Europe, they just locked them out of their whole systems and they essentially were wanted $60 million or something. But it's just crazy how that's how heists are essentially done now. Is completely anonymous, over the internet, over the phone, and just there's no physical.
I could barely send an email, so that tells you where I would be in today's mafia.
Right. But I'm just wondering if, because it is kind of crazy to me because sports gambling made up, I imagine, a decent chunk of the income for the mob, and then now just the government's like, we'll just do that now that it's so easy for it to be done. And it used to be the worst thing, and they were like, this is total poison for the country. And now you watch any game, and you're like, it's just ads the whole time for legalized gambling.
That's right. It's amazing.
It is crazy how it moves like that, but I guess they have to, pivot to some degree. But
I mean, it shows the degradation of ethics and stuff in modern society, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't when Abe Rellis is in my book, I talk about Abe Rellis, who was like the first, before Joe Valachi, he was like a guy who ratted on Murder Inc., Murder Incorporated. And, basically the first time they had to make a deal with a murderer, the prosecutors agonized over it. Can we forgive a guy who killed people in return for testifying against other people? They agonized over it. This was something that they didn't think that they could get away with from the American public. They didn't think that it was ethical. And then eventually they wrestled with it and said, maybe it's worth the consequences. And now that's done every day. People are forgiven for 20 murders in the courts to give up the next guy up the line who maybe only murdered 2 people. Right. We don't think twice about it. So, our sort of things which speaks to what you said, gambling and stuff, things we thought of as different then, we see differently today. And I think that it's a degradation sometimes. I hung out in an OTB, off-track betting, when I was a kid with my father. I spent Saturdays in the OTB, as a kid, little kid, barely able to, my feet didn't even touch the floor if I sat on a folding chair. And I was in the OTB hanging out all day with my father. Well, that was off-track betting run by the city, the state of New York. The state of New York was allowed to make my father and everybody else in there go broke, but the mob can't, so you have to wonder,
of course,
yeah.
And I mean, it's probably too early to tell, but I think there's a good chance that 5-10 years from now, we're going to look back on this legalized gambling and they'll say probably wasn't, other than the tax revenues they took in, they're probably going to be creating a pretty large public issue, I guess. In terms of
it's sad. You see an 80-year-old lady scratching in a gas station, with a book of scratch-offs, and maybe who knows if she's going through her milk money. It's sad.
Yeah.
Oh, shout out, Mom.
Yeah. Anything else, Rafe?
Just one last thing. So I know that a lot of people ratted and stuff back then. Did you have anyone that flipped and then you were talking to them, they had a wire on them and you didn't know or you found out or anything?
I was never caught on a wire or a bug. And I'll tell you, I was anal about that. So I had friends that I wouldn't talk on the phone. And if we were even driving in a car, and let's say my friends started talking freely, I would literally pull over. I'd tell them, shut up, pull over. We get out on the shoulder of the expressway and then talk up and down the shoulder of the expressway until we exhausted the conversation, then got back in the car and drove away. And they would laugh at me later because they said, you were so careful. Meanwhile, you were the first guy to go away. Out of all my friends, I was the first one to get really knocked for a lot of time. And I was anal about that. And as far as somebody wearing a wire on me, not that I know of. There was one close call. If I could say it succinctly, I'll try. The guy who I brought a lot of my stolen goods to, my major fence, I called him Uncle Billy. He was my friend's uncle. I named him Uncle Jimmy in my memoir, Unlocked, but I used to call him Uncle Billy, and which was his real name. He's probably dead by now. He was older then. And when he got pinched by the FBI, he gave up everything I did. And I didn't know that at the time. Yeah, I didn't know that at the time. So he asked if he could see me and my friend, who was his nephew, if we could come down to the city and talk to him about the subpoenas, the FBI subpoenas that he said he got too, and we had gotten. And we were on our way into the city, and without getting too deep into it, I realized he was the snitch. Just before we got to the Midtown Tunnel, literally on the way through, right before the Midtown Tunnel, we stopped to get a bite to eat, and I realized he's the snitch. And I said, son of a bitch, if we would have went in, he probably would have had the whole living room wired, maybe even video and audio, and we would have went through all the crimes and all the heists and hijackings that we did and brought him. And we would have just been locked up that night because we didn't realize till later he was I realized that night he was a snitch, but it didn't come out till later. But I just, in the nick of time, and how I realized that, I've talked about this on other podcasts, and I guess it's interesting enough, I should repeat it. The FBI, when they subpoenaed us, they gave us a number of heists and hijackings they were looking at. And we had committed all but one. And the one I forgot until we were on our way into the city was something that we just we weren't sure if he was always fair with us. And we wanted to keep him honest. So we said we robbed a truck. Then the next day we told him we dumped it to somebody else just to make sure he knew we could go anywhere. We don't need to always go to you. And it turned out he was always fair with us. He wasn't trying to, lowball us. But because that truck was never robbed and we just made it up, and that was on the subpoena, or rather when we were subpoenaed, the attorney was told that the FBI wanted to question us about that as well as other stuff. That's how I realized it could have only come from him, that he's the only one who knew because we never took it. And that's what hit me right before the Midtown Tunnel. And that's when I said, son of a bitch, your uncle's the rat. And it took some convincing until I explained it to my friend, because it was hard for him to, he knows him his whole life. And it's, my uncle, kidding me? My uncle's a great guy. My uncle would never rat me out. And it turned out his uncle was the rat. So we probably would have been on camera, audio and video that day in his living room. We laughed about it then. We would have said we would have looked like real chooches, going over everything with him. And then the FBI would have just came out of the next room and said, you're all under arrest. And I lasted another year on the street, year and a half, but eventually they got me, the FBI. They were really, they were diligent. They never left me alone. And they eventually got their man. And maybe had I, I just had another year on the street of stress, basically. So it really didn't matter in the end anyway.
And whatever happened to him, the uncle?
He went into, I don't know if he went into the program, but we never saw him again. The other guy who did go into the witness protection program, we knew who he was. My friend's uncle, he was what we understood to be later as what they would call a dry snitch, where he gave the FBI all of this information, and then he was not willing to testify on the stand in open court against people. So, so we don't, I don't know. We never saw him again.
Was there ever any, because how many, it seems like fairly common, I guess, or not super common, but that people go in the witness protection program. But were there ever any instances where people were like, I saw so-and-so? I'm going to
tell you a crazy, I'll tell you a crazy story. I was doing a speaking engagement in, it's one of two states, and I probably shouldn't mention either of them.
Yeah, that's fine. But not pertinent. Not pertinent.
Yeah, I was doing a speaking engagement, and I wanted to walk. I got there early. I flew in early, and let's say it was scheduled for tonight at 8 p.m. And it's like, I got in at 2 in the afternoon, and I said, instead of going to my hotel room and reading, maybe I'll walk around town a little bit and check things out and, kill some time, get a coffee. And it was starting to get chilly, and I didn't bring proper clothing, or I hadn't unpacked. So I said, let me go buy a jacket. So I popped into a store, and the guy hears my New York accent, and he goes, where you from? And I told him New York, and he tells me where he's from. And I said, what are you doing here in the middle of nowhere? And then slowly but surely I figured out he was in the witness protection program. And I didn't want to interfere. Yeah, I was out of the life already.
It wasn't someone you knew, though.
No, it wasn't someone I knew, but he was someone who knew people I knew.
Right.
And I in the course of conversation, I figured out this son of a bitch relocated or was relocated, and I think I think he figured out at some point that I figured it out. And that's when he started realizing that he had talked too much. And I walked out of there, and I said to myself, he's probably going to call, his FBI handler or something and saying, tell the guy I screwed up. And I figured, if I get grabbed down here before I leave, I'll just explain to them I don't know the guy and I don't give a shit who he is. I'm just here for a speaking engagement. But whatever the case was, I figured it out. Yeah,
that probably stressed him out.
Did you have a nickname?
Did I have a nickname? Yeah, my friends called me Big Lou. Yeah, Big Lou, because
Big Lou.
Yeah, I'm not that big. I'm physically speaking. Yeah,
it's always how it goes. It's always the opposite, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. All right, Ray. Thanks, man.
All right. Cheers, man. Thank you.
Yeah, you got it, buddy.
All right. I just want to talk about this one quick thing. So you did some work with the British government?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it's great stuff, man. Glad you mentioned that. Wow, nobody ever mentions that. Thank you, Danny.
No problem.
So the Brits.
I prepared a lot.
Yeah, it's great. So I always tried to go into the American U.S. prison system, federal, state, county. I always offered myself as sort of like, let me help you. Let me see what I could do to sort of, build a library, give these guys incentives. I tried to reach out at one time to the head of the BOP. They will always shut me down. That's one of the bad things about our country. We have this sort of like superiority complex. We don't need your help. You're a convict. Don't call us. If we call you, we'll let you know. Unless it's political, then they love you. Then they want to invite you to the White House and ask your advice for everything. But other than that, they don't really want to bother with you. The Brits, on the other hand, said, look, you know what? Can we bring you over, and can we bring you into these prisons up and down, England, and go in, talk to the inmates. And I did a lot of that. And I promoted literacy inside the prisons. I promoted relations between what they call the screws. We call them hacks, which are the prison guards. I created better relations between them. And I did my best always to promote literacy and create better relations inside the prisons. And whenever they invited me, I would get on a plane and go. And at some point or another, I forgot about it. A few months went by since the last time I was there. And I got a phone call early in the morning, and I saw 4400144, whatever the English, the code is for Great Britain. And I said, oh, the Brits are calling. Figured maybe it's one of my co-producers or something, because I've done stuff there, for television. And I picked up, and they said, we're inviting you to number 10 Downing Street. We'd like to give you an award for the work you've done inside the prisons. And it was a great, feeling that the Brits were rewarding me for the work that I had done to try to help out their prisoners. And they gave me an award at number 10 Downing Street, which was equal to going to the White House here in the United States. Yeah. I mean, my own country doesn't pay attention to me, but luckily the Brits did. So that was nice.
And do you think that the United States is hesitant due to the fact that it's just like the privatized prison system? Like they don't have the incentives really to want to.
Yeah, we need a major correction in a lot of ways. When they were doing during the last presidential administration, they were trying to overhaul. During the Trump administration, they tried to overhaul the prison system in a lot of ways, and I tried to reach out to people who were involved with it. And once again, they wanted to get a rapper, they wanted to get a hip hop guy, and I'm a guy who lived it. Let me come in there and try to. They wanted this sort of star power, the celebrity. And I would have done it quietly. I would never even told anyone I was involved in it. I just wanted to help the inmates and help you create a better system so that you decrease the rate of recidivism, give people a better chance while they're in there. And there also has to be something done with the court systems. Although 99% of the people in prison belong there, including myself when I was there, I belong there. I know what I did. I did bad things. I end up in prison. You can't be surprised. But most people do belong there. But there are some who don't, and they're railroaded. And it's sad to see, I met a lot of innocent people in jail, and I also met a lot of people who were sentenced to time that was unequal to the crime that they had committed. And it was horrible to see that when a guy's doing 20 years and he probably deserved 5. Or it's horrible when you see a guy who's just railroaded because they wanted the next guy, and because he was unwilling or didn't have any knowledge of who he was hanging out with, they just say, you know what, then F you, do 20 years. And they know a lot of times those guys are innocent, but they don't care. So I saw a lot of that. I was able to reverse one of my cases. I studied law. I got help by a brilliant guy who was a legal eagle. He helped me to teach me law. And eventually, after reversing my own case, in one of my own cases, I was able to help a lot of other people get relief in the courts by looking at their cases and reading their indictments for them. A lot of times, I'll tell you how bad the prison system is. I was with a guy who was doing 20 years, and I told him the statute only carried 10. Your lawyer never told you that they sentenced you to 20. The judge didn't realize it. Your statute carries 10. How the hell did they give you 20? So in the course of conversation, I got a little short with him. I was getting aggravated for him on his behalf. I was aggravated because this poor guy is doing all this time. He was a young kid. Yeah. And I'm going, I can't believe this shit. What is this? Didn't you read it? And at some point he looks down. When I said, didn't you read your own indictment? He looks down, and I said, you didn't read your own indictment. And he looked up at me and he says, I don't know how to read. And I said, you're kidding me. I said, they sentenced an illiterate to 20 years when he deserved 10. And they never even asked you if you knew how to read your own indictment. And the lawyer didn't care, and the judge didn't care, and the prosecutor didn't care. So this is something wrong with our system. Yeah. That's something dead wrong. The other thing they do is they lock up a lot of people who need mental health care.
Oh, that's a big one.
Yeah, it's a big deal. You got a guy banging his head against the wall all night. This guy needs mental health care. He doesn't belong in here with us.
I love like the studios near Madison Square Garden. Like I see that all around here, where it's just like clearly, cops are dealing with people who are just obviously mentally ill, and they're just like, throw them in jail.
They put them in jail.
Yeah.
Yeah. They put them in jail. That's right.
Yeah. All right. That has been, that's been the show. Thank you so much for coming on. So where's the best place for people to find you?
LouisFerrante.com, LouisFerrante.com. That's my website. There are
I'll
links
post the link below. I'll post the link below and the link for your Amazon page for all the books.
Yep.
And your one book's out now. Next one's going to be out.
Yeah. Borgata Volume 1 is out now. Borgata Volume 2 will be out this year. Go ahead and order the first and pre-order the second. Feel free to email me. You have any thoughts, questions? Read the book first. I would like, instead of asking questions before, read the book. Then if you have any questions afterwards, feel free to ask me. And thanks a lot, Danny. It's great on your show. I really appreciate you. You know, you're kicking some butt. You're doing a great job.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. For those of you watching, new episode of The Bathhouse tomorrow night and Saratoga Springs Comedy Works this weekend, Friday and Saturday. Tickets on my website. Good night, everybody. Thank you again, Louis.
Thanks.
Empathic abilities, yeah, my face be also stoic. Bleed blow up, nigga, that just means I'm working. They see me as a leader, so that's why I'm Captain Kirkin. These charts from the stars, that much is for certain. You can fit his hit if you up or if you hurt. I'm raising my stock, not talking my feet in some Birkin. Number Johnny 5, got a fucking short circuit. Bring the track to life when I spit phenomenal. When I hit, she feel that shit in her abdominals. These rappers make me laugh like comic view, they comically. You know I got a ball out, I hit the track running just like Sonic do. They don't want to turn on my light switch. Yeah, they was trying to get me on my hype shit. Yeah, they don't want to turn on my light switch. Yeah, and they tried to down me on some KO type shit. Yeah, they don't want to turn on my light switch. Yeah, now we pulling up fresh on some flight shit. They don't want to turn on my light switch. Yeah, they don't want to turn on my light switch. They don't want to turn on my light switch. Yeah, they was trying to get me on my hype shit. Yeah, they don't want to turn on my light switch. Yeah, and they tried to down me on some KO type shit. Yeah, they don't want to turn on my light switch. Yeah, I'm pulling up fresh on some